So what are President Pavel and the Dezosine up to again? Ladies and gentlemen, let's start with Filip Turek, his case involving alleged rape and domestic violence. But don't worry, we will fully address Petr Pavel and all the information and disinformation surrounding him and his ex-wife, Hanna Pavlova. So Filip Turek faced, let's say, a report, an accusation that he used violence against his girlfriend. The evidence was such that the alleged victim accused him of this violence, and it was supported by some emails, but none of it was really direct evidence that would hold up in court. Or if it would hold up, it would be only very, very, very weakly, and at the same time, of course, everything was already time-barred, so nothing much happened. But the point is that under this accusation against Filip Turek of some kind of violence, of some kind of rough behavior and so on, there was at least an accusation from the victim and some support in the form of an email or something, even though the evidence was indirect and rather poor. However, there are rumors going around here that Petr Pavel allegedly used to beat his wife, his first wife, Hanna Pavlova, according to these Facebook profiles. And the evidence for that is simply that people say it's known. People know about it. Everyone in Prostyov knows. The neighbors said it. A friend of mine told me who knows someone else, and so on and so forth. Those are all the evidence and accusations. There is no investigation going on. No accusation has been made or given directly by the alleged victim, whom these spreaders of disinformation and unfounded conspiracy theories are using here. There is no accusation from the victim, Hanna Pavlova, here. There is no evidence here, no email, nothing at all. The only thing we have here are copy-paste posts from people on Facebook saying that in Prostyov, everyone knows what Pavel was like, that he beat his wife, that he's a violent man, that that's why she left him, and so on and so forth. That's the argument. That's the only evidence. So not the statement of the alleged victim, no reports, no recordings, no direct witnesses, like, for example, the sons who supported Petr Pavel in his presidential campaign, sons whose mother he supposedly beat and neglected supported President Pavel in his presidential campaign. That's right. If someone was beating your mom and neglecting you, the first thing that would come to your mind would be to support him in his presidential campaign. That's what you would do. Definitely yes. Of course, that's a terrible nonsense, right? It doesn't make any sense. So in this regard, there is absolutely no evidence at all. But okay, we can also look at the way people require something to be disproved. Pavel didn't do that. So if it's not enough for you that there is no evidence he did it, and you need to disprove that he didn't do it, then that's pretty stupid in itself, isn't it? Because, of course, the burden of proof is on the one who is accusing someone. So if you want to say that someone is an abuser, you have to prove that they are an abuser. It's not up to the person to prove that they're not an abuser. We have the presumption of innocence. Yeah, and people who say that Petr Pavel has to prove that he's not an abuser and has to defend himself against this conspiracy really don't understand what legal system we're in. And in my opinion, they're cannibals, pedophiles, and maybe even zoophiles. And let them prove that they're not. Checkmate, yeah, something like that. Nevertheless. Okay. So let's at least try to prove somehow that they're idiots. First of all, the communist past of Petr Pavel. He was heading for an intelligence course and higher ranks as an officer in the Czechoslovak People's Army. Such a person had to have a certain kind of clearance, had to have a good personnel record. A poor record would have ruined your chances. If it was known about you that you abused your wife, because a good communist doesn't do that, and at the same time, your path into, let's say, intelligence circles would be blocked if you had any background that could be used to blackmail you. Like, for example, that you're a violent person. So the communists were convinced that Petr Pavel was not a violent person, and they evaluated his relationship with his wife in his personnel report as positive, as fine, as chill. And even after the fall of communism, when Petr Pavel was moving into higher positions within the Czech army, you still needed to have some kind of clearance within the army. The army needs to know about your family background, whether you can be relied on, whether you have any problems, if there is anything someone could use to blackmail you or attack you, anything that could damage the reputation of the army, especially if, for example, you are going to become the chief of the general staff or the commander of NATO, right? And all these checks, assessments, and so on turned out that, hey, Pavel is clean, he has a relatively okay family background, good family relationships, nothing in his past that could be used to blackmail him, no domestic violence was proven. The absence of domestic violence was proven by the communists, the Czechs, and NATO structures. But then there's the question, so why did they break up? Look, that's why we have this article here. Czech soldiers experience psychological issues after missions. That's a big problem. Soldiers often need psychological help and so on after returning from missions. But even when they come back and seem fine, not suffering from any psychological issues, their perspective often changes on life, on problems, on the world, on how people understand each other, and so on. And if their partner is a civilian, it often happens that the soldier breaks up with their partner after returning from the mission because they start to look at things from different perspectives, from different points of view. The soldier who faced death, who really saw brutal violence and so on, most of the time he becomes more cynical, usually in a way that the things a civilian woman sees as huge problems he doesn't really care about, because compared to what happens, I don't know, in Afghanistan, it's actually fine, and so on and so on. And at that moment, those relationships fall apart because those soldiers aren't really compatible with the civilians, you know? And that was the case with this relationship too. And then Pavel found, Eva Pavlova, who comes from military circles, so there's a bit more understanding there, also considering the career and so on. Then we have, of course, the argument, we're getting to the argument that everyone in Prostějov knows about it, that in Prostějov everyone knows. So maybe everyone in Prostějov knows about it, but in Prostějov, where supposedly everyone knows that Petr Pavel is allegedly a violent person, he still won the election. So I'm asking, if everyone in Prostějov knows that Petr Pavel is a violent man who beats women, why did most people vote for him? Why does he have about the same lead there as in most medium-sized towns? Why didn't everyone knowing about his violence affect the election in Prostějov at all? And by the way, why did the fact that he's an alleged abuser only come out now? Why didn't they bring it up against him before the election? It's almost as if it didn't come from Andrej Babiš, but from someone who himself faced accusations of being an abuser. So maybe that's where the inspiration came from, or I don't know. I'm just asking. Look, the problem here is that this isn't about slandering Petr Pavel or anything like that. That's basically normal, it's disgusting, sure, and so on, it's a lie. No, it's not proven in any way, it's literally been debunked, and so on and so forth. They were even able to go so far as to make sure of it. They even made sure of this and said, okay, so there's no evidence that he beat her, but you know what, people know about it. And if by any chance Hanna Pavlova showed up, she probably has a different last name now. So if Mrs. Hanna came now and said he didn't beat her, it's only because she's afraid of him or because he bribed her, right? Classic conspiracy mentality, If reality matches your conspiracy, just make up a new conspiracy to fit it into reality. Move the goalposts. If a direct witness rejects your conspiracy, accuse that witness of being part of the plot. Solved, right? So just conspiracy nonsense. However, as I said, that's not really the president's problem, and so on and so forth. Look, political attacks and disgusting campaigns have happened. I'd rather like to point out that this is more of a problem of domestic violence as such. In the Czech Republic, domestic violence is terribly downplayed. When a man faces domestic violence, he's often ridiculed and ostracized. When a woman faces it, the situation is a bit better, but the punishments for domestic violence are quite low. And especially if the woman is under the influence of violence from someone well-known or famous, she's often attacked by people saying that she just wants attention and so on. And when someone brings up some indirect evidence, they're attacked by that person's fans, saying they're trying to destroy that person. Personally, if someone brought up some direct evidence against Pavel right now, I'm willing to instantly condemn Pavel. But there really isn't any evidence. There is actually more evidence that what they're saying about him is just total crap. And overall, the fact that they're exploiting the topic of domestic violence only makes things worse for everyone who actually faces real domestic violence. And it's really predatory. It's a parasitic relationship. The relationship between those who want to profit off the president and the hatred from those political figures who want to ostracize him and, let's say, fight against him politically. And these people have parasitically attached themselves to the empathy you feel towards victims of domestic violence and are abusing your empathy to actually provoke in you some tendencies to ostracize or slander someone and so on. And now, of course, since it's all just a lie that's not backed by anything, next time it turns out, or when it comes out, or when someone is accused of domestic violence, and maybe there will be some indirect evidence, society will be even more likely to downplay it, because these things have already been used here so many times. As a political fight, as a political weapon, without any evidence that it actually happened. And now, like in the case of Pavel, it's an absolute extreme because not only is there no indirect evidence, there's no evidence at all. On the contrary, there is evidence that it didn't happen. So the biggest problem is that this whole case damages the position of victims of domestic violence as a whole. And I think that the people behind this idea, like, oh, let's damage Pavel through domestic violence and so on, could only have done it because they have absolutely no respect for women, absolutely no respect for the human psyche, for human victims and so on. Because only then can they use women as chess pieces and manipulate them like objects. And anyone can say, even during the election campaign, when a woman was his opponent who treated her decently in some way, maybe even gave her a gift and so on, was not vulgar to her or anything like that. And on the other hand, who calls women who stand against him emotional, unstable, or downright stupid? He talks about them as objects and trophies and so on and so forth. Which electorate and which groups of people think about women this way and would be capable of abusing these things like this? Everyone can draw their own conclusion, but I think it's pretty clear. There is no evidence, and every spreader of this disinformation is just taking advantage of the suffering of real victims. So that's that. Have a great day. Don't support domestic violence and don't support disinformation. Support my work instead, and bye.